term limits.
I had a lot of Republican friends who were sending me texts during this period saying, your party is insane. They were saying, we've never seen anything like this.
Anita Dunn left her position as a senior advisor to the president this week, marking the end of an era for the Biden White House. Dunn has been a close Biden confidant since the first days of his 2020 campaign.
I was on that campaign after he came in fifth in New Hampshire, had no money. We had people calling us all the time to say he should drop out, that he should get out. Now was the time for him to get out. And, he wasn't ready to do that.
It was Dunn who helped take charge of that campaign after Biden lost the first three primary contests before turning things around in South Carolina. And it was after that victory when a key piece of Biden world lore was born, that the press, pundits, and many politicians always underestimate Joe Biden. After Dunn joined the new president in the White House as a core member of his tight inner circle, that lesson repeated itself. First with the passage of his legislative agenda after months of uncertainty, and then again in the 2022 midterms, when Biden did not suffer the massive losses in Congress that first-term presidents have come to expect. So after Biden's catastrophic performance at the June CNN debate, Dunn and the Biden team developed a familiar strategy. Power through the media and party mob dumping on Biden, and race to the virtual convention vote, after which they bet everyone would move on. But this time, it was different.
The structure of this campaign had been fairly static for a long time, and the debate didn't change that. What did change it was 24 days of unremitting, negative, horrible attacks on Joe Biden. And then he started moving from his own party and from the press.
Dunn is now headed to a group called Future Forward, the main super PAC that will work to help elect Harris and Walz. Her last day with Biden was on Tuesday. On Wednesday, she and I sat down for an hour in a borrowed conference room at the offices of Covington and Burling, the same law firm that vetted Kamala Harris's possible running mates. We discussed the pivotal decision to call for that June debate, what Dunn was thinking as she watched Biden struggle through the event, the strategy she and her colleagues developed to fight the calls for Biden to step aside, Biden's final days as the nominee, the new electoral opportunities now available to Harris, and a lot more. I'm Ryan Lizza, and this is Playbook Deep Dive. Let's talk about the last few insane months of American politics. You've been in presidential campaigns since Carter days, right? And you were in an incredible primary that some people forget how good it was, the Gore-Bradley primary. You were on the Bradley side. Another incredible one in 2020. You obviously were with the Obama team. Just given your history in politics, tell us about comparing it to these other things that you have seen, these other historical eras. How crazy has the summer of 2024 been in American politics for you?
The crazy quality is very high. Now, there have been other crazy periods. There are campaigns I didn't work on that had certifiably crazy periods also. I would say, going back to 2020, that the month of February in 2020 was one of the genuinely crazy experiences that people will have a difficult time replicating in the future. And in particular, the 3 days between the South Carolina primary and Super Tuesday.
All right, let's back up a little bit to the pre-debate periods.
Yes.
In May, you announce jointly that there would be a debate on CNN on June 27th. Tell us about the decision-making process that led to this decision to have the earliest debate ever and ditching the Commission on Presidential Debates format. We had your friend Frank Ferenkopf on this podcast not long ago.
I was quite amused by all of the hand-wringing over the commission since
he says you hate the commission.
I know, but then he walked that back a little. I am not a hater. Okay. And I think people know that. I'm not a hater. To be clear, the commission never reached out to the Biden campaign ever to say, we're thinking about these dates. We're thinking about these locations. What do you guys think about 2020 when we didn't enforce our own rules and let your candidate be exposed to COVID? Well, we never had those conversations because they didn't reach out to us.
So what led to the decision to do the early debate?
There were a couple of reasons. One is that the race was fully formed quite early, that Biden was the nominee of the Democratic Party and Trump was going to be the nominee of the Republican Party. Trump was not getting the kind of scrutiny that we felt he deserved, both in terms of what he was saying, the policies that he was proposing, and the media was trying to figure out how to cover him. But the net effect of it, they still are. But the net effect of it was that you continued to have a referendum on Joe Biden and you had Donald Trump, who basically could go and say and do anything without any scrutiny. It was always our belief, and certainly bolstered by our research, that once voters actually were exposed to him again, they would be reminded strongly why they had not felt that they should reelect him to begin with. So we thought the sooner we could have that process begin, the better off we would be as a campaign. So we had started discussions, early in the spring, late in the winter, about whether we wanted to change that format up, whether we wanted to do it earlier. I think all of us felt very comfortable having news organizations host them as opposed to having the commission host them. So, and the Trump campaign had already said they didn't want the commission to host them, so we didn't think that would be a problem, as it was not. And we knew that the news organizations would have no problem with hosting them instead of the commission. So we felt that this was something that was imminently doable and that made sense from a strategic point of view to force the choice as opposed to the referendum.
Did you have any doubts about the president and putting him in that situation that early?
No, we didn't. The president won both debates in 2020. The president went into a pretty hostile chamber for the State of the Union and performed brilliantly.
On a teleprompter, though.
And ad-libbing, my friend. A lot of ad-libbing there. And his best moments were the ones he ad-libbed. He has a history of doing very well in these events. So we felt very comfortable with his ability to do it. We felt that strategically it would help the campaign enormously to kind of jumpstart the choice piece of this and give us good momentum, particularly given the fact that the Republican convention was mid-July, that he would have a vice presidential nominee. So he was looking at a period where he was going to have, some decent political momentum, and we wanted to have some decent political momentum as well.
So part of it was, I was thinking this at the time, was you take a bite out of the two big free media events that you get in a presidential campaign, the VP and the convention.
Yeah, that's right. When you're the non-incumbent, you have the advantage of having one additional big media event where people are focused on you, when voters kind of pay attention, when you have significant news coverage, and that is your choice of the vice president and your vice presidential nominee. And we obviously didn't have that. We already had a vice president. So they already had a bit of an advantage in terms of that ability to go out and roll out a vice presidential nominee going into their convention. So, and we also, the people who are running his campaign this time are very good. They were running and have been running
the Trump campaign.
Oh, the Trump campaign.
Yeah.
No question. They're much smarter. They're running a very competent campaign. We saw that early in this process. And so we had a reasonable expectation that they were going to have a fairly competent rollout and a fairly good convention.
Whose idea was the debate?
It was a joint idea. Everybody had these discussions. We, as senior advisors, constantly were revisiting assumptions we had made. Do we have to do it this way? Have we always done it this way?
Did you tell us a little bit about the prep? Because obviously what people want to know and understand is the Biden that they saw on the debate stage triggered this unprecedented series of events. So people want to know, was that obvious behind the scenes? In fact, one of the questions I get asked all the time is, did his advisors do this on purpose because they saw him behind the scenes like we saw him on the debate stage, and they wanted the public and the Democratic Party to see it, to air this conversation publicly?
Okay, so that's ludicrous.
You've heard this though, right?
but it's totally ludicrous. I mean, the idea that we ever would have put him in that situation is just crazy. We have all been through debate preps with Joe Biden. Some people have been through them since the 1987 campaign. Okay.
Ron.
And Mike Donald. People have been through these for a long time.
Yeah.
With him. There are certainly people who went through it in 2008, and many of us went through it in 2020. And as you recall, we had a number of primary debates as well as the general election debates. I think all of us have a very good sense of Joe Biden and his strengths. And, we felt coming out of the prep that he was fairly well prepared. Now, he also had a terrible cold that got worse in the course of the week. I think there was no question that it played a role in his he didn't feel well.
Did anyone ever think in that run-up, given the cold and the chances that he might not perform so well, that you should cancel?
Again, we've all worked for Joe Biden for a long time. We've seen him go out there when he wasn't feeling well. We've seen him go out there with colds, and he is a game day player. So, and it also wasn't clear just how badly he was feeling. And I'll say I went home Wednesday night. So I did not go to Atlanta on Thursday. So I didn't see him that day. But, he came out of that debate. He went to a debate watch party and was terrific. He went to a Waffle House and worked the crowd and was terrific. Landed in North Carolina at 1:30 in the morning and greeted every single person there. Did a rally in North Carolina that Friday with a big crowd and did a great job. So I don't think any of us really know why it was. He just, he said it himself. He had a bad night.
But you didn't see that in debate prep?
We did not see it in debate prep, no.
Does he blame any of you for this decision to put him in that debate early?
He has not blamed anybody. That is not who Joe Biden is.
Where were you watching the debate?
I watched the debate at home. I watch it on dial groups.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. I watched the dials.
All right. So tell us about the dials.
I will tell you about the dials because it is a very good illustration of the, shall we say, the distance between voters and the elites.
Is it different than watching it on Twitter and watching it on the dials?
Watching it on the dials, which is actual voters experiencing the debate.
What kind? Do you have what's the universe of voters you're looking for in those dials?
They are people who are undecided. Some of them voted for Biden in 2020. Some of them didn't vote. A few of them may have voted for Trump, but they're all people who are undecided for 2024, who are not sure they're going to vote for either candidate, who are not sure they're going to vote, who are not sure they're going to vote for Biden. So they were undecided.
All right, so set the scene for us. You've got a TV screen with the debate, and then you've got when you say you're looking at the dials, what is the data or information you're looking at with the dials?
Well, when you watch dial groups, people are instructed to start at 50 on their dials. Okay, that is the neutral position. If they feel better, they turn it to the right, and the numbers go up. And if they don't like what they're hearing, they turn it to the left, and the numbers go down. So it's a very simple process by which people can, figure out which lines.
It's immediate feedback.
Really, it's immediate feedback, but it also, you do a focus group before with a vote, and you do a focus group after with a vote, and you hear people's reactions. Is in 2020 in the first debate, one of the members of our team, 20 minutes into the debate, and he was actually at the debate, texted me and he was like, "This is terrible. We're losing." And I sent back a thing saying, "I'm watching the dial groups and people hate Donald Trump." And so voters experience this differently. And one of the things that was interesting, Ryan, was that, voters didn't particularly like Biden's performance in the first half hour. He wasn't scoring well at all. But it's not as though they walked out. They very much liked a lot of the second half of the debate for Joe Biden. They hated Donald Trump. By the end of this, the first part of the strategy had absolutely worked in that people were like, "Oh, I'd forgotten. I really don't like this guy. He's all about himself. He's bragging. He's this." I mean, they really did not like him. So he didn't gain any ground in the debate whatsoever. And we actually picked up a few votes in the group. So it was a bad debate, but it didn't feel catastrophic at all, certainly in terms of voters. And I think other people who did independent research saw roughly the same thing. If you go back and you look at the polls, what you will see is you didn't see much movement whatsoever coming out of the debate because it was a fairly the structure of this campaign had been fairly static for a long time, and the debate didn't change that. What did change it was 24 days of unremitting, negative, horrible attacks on Joe Biden. And yeah, then he started moving from his own party and from the press.
Well, all right. So the dial groups that we were all looking at were our iMessages with Democrats across the country saying literally in the first 15 minutes, I had people whose instincts I trust on this stuff saying, major supporters of Biden and the campaign. And, obviously you've heard this a million times. I'm sure you had your own, but that Biden has to drop out. They need to replace Biden. It was immediate. It was within the first 15 minutes.
It was.
And you got the same, I imagine.
Well,
tell us about that dial group of Democrats across the country who know you and trust you and are saying something. What's their reaction? When are you getting that feedback?
People start getting that feedback. I would say within 48 hours. And we were sitting there thinking, the polls really haven't moved. He's out there performing well. Then this whole narrative took place about how he was, quote, holed up at Camp David. He spent Friday campaigning. He spent Saturday fundraising in the Hamptons. Okay. And then in New Jersey, he ended the day with Governor Murphy. On Sunday, he spent the day with his family. On Monday, he returned to the White House and spoke to the Supreme Court's decision on immunity in a very strong statement. So this idea that somehow he was holed up, now he was recovering still, and that was absolutely true. But the sort of snowball effect really didn't start picking up, I would say, until that week. And after the Monday was the Supreme Court opinion, just so people have the timeline. Yes.
And then on my, and you're saying that next week is when it started picking up? Yeah. Yes.
And the data still didn't support this at all. We were looking at it and we were not seeing huge changes, but we were seeing, an environment in the press that was, just unremittingly negative, and nobody was covering Trump whatsoever. I mean, Donald Trump was out there saying whatever he wanted to do, and the press was like, we don't care. So meanwhile, Joe Biden is still governing. He's still doing all this important stuff. He's out there campaigning. He is out there. I went to Wisconsin with him for an event, and people felt very strongly about the bullying. They didn't like it, and voters didn't like it. They felt that it was unfair and that it was wrong. So you had a lot of different things going on here. Clearly there were leaders of the party who decided to go ahead and go very public, and that gave permission to other people to go public.
And you mean when
I'm not going to
senators,
talk about
House
specific.
members, or do you mean like when Nancy Pelosi goes on TV and there were two moments where she goes out publicly, and when things sort of seem like they were dying down, reopens the debate?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Key moments, no?
Key moments where people made the decision when it looked like we were reaching, a point where we would fight our way through it. I had a lot of Republican friends who were sending me texts during this period saying, your party is insane. They were saying, we've never seen anything like this. Our party closes ranks. You fight it through. You have a 24-hour news cycle. He had a bad debate and you move on. They could not believe what was going on here. And then you had this decision that the Democratic Party made to ignore their primary voters and ignore their primary process. And that was what should happen. And that was a very donor-driven thing.
Supreme Court reform is an issue whose time has come. The justices wield tremendous power for decades with little accountability. In response to ethics scandals and rulings out of step with public opinion and legal precedent, President Biden is calling for 18-year term limits and a binding code of ethics. Long supported by the Brennan Center, these reforms have broad bipartisan support. Congress should take action to establish term limits and bring regular turnover to the bench. Doing so would save the Supreme Court from itself. To learn more, visit BrennanCenter.org/term limits.
Do you agree to some of the people who are disappointed about this, that it was essentially, a coup?
I don't regard it as a coup for a couple of reasons. One is because the vice president was nothing except unremittingly loyal and supportive to the president throughout this and was fully engaged in the, what is your plan? What is our plan? What are we doing next? So, if you're going to have a coup, usually someone has to lead it. And she was 100%.
Well,
terrifically loyal. And I will say, I give her remarkable props. Her staff, she made sure there was never a murmur from anyone in that camp. And that takes an enormous amount of discipline and also an enormous amount of loyalty. So
I mean, what we have reported and others have reported is that the most significant players in this were Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and Barack Obama. I mean, how difficult was it to be in the White House and watch those four leaders of the Democratic Party try and push Joe Biden out?
We were just trying to figure out a way to keep Joe Biden in as long as he wanted to. As long as he wanted to run, we wanted to make sure that we were coming up with a way to make sure he could run. And Joe Biden is a person whose personal resilience and ability to get knocked down and get back up is unquestioned. And I think that we as a team have always tried to do our best for him in times like this when they're tough. Some people on that staff have been through some exceptionally tough times with him. I was on that campaign after he came in 5th in New Hampshire, had no money. We had people calling us all the time to say he should drop out, that he should get out. Now was the time for him to get out. And, he wasn't ready to do that. He ran because he believed he was the best person to beat Donald Trump and because he also believed he was the best person to lead the country. Now, if he's not a candidate, he made it very clear that the second best person was his vice president. And that is where we are now. And I think if you look at the way the vice president has been able to unify the party and excite the party, it was the right decision.
All right, we'll get to that. Just a couple more on this because this, Anita, this is for history. When you say you had a strategy to sort of keep him in, what was the strategy?
Well, the first piece of it was to make it very clear to people that he wasn't getting out.
Yeah,
and so that was the letter that was sent to Capitol Hill,
which among some members in Congress it backfired.
Well, I'm sure it did, but at the same time,
who wrote that?
I'm not going to talk about the internal details.
There's a rumor that his son Hunter was contributed to it, which some members, when they heard that rumor, it turned them off.
All I'm going to say is that he was the nominee. Yeah. To my knowledge, that was not the case. But I will say he was the nominee. And so this idea that there was a discussion going on was something that we felt, and I think all of us as a senior team felt, we needed to shut down and make it very clear that he actually was not going anywhere, that there wasn't a discussion. There was no open primary to be had out here. And, Ryan, you referenced at the beginning my first campaign, which was in 1980. I've been through an open primary kind of push at a convention. I've been through contested primaries for an incumbent president. It's very simple. They don't have happy endings. Okay. The person who's in the White House loses. Okay. And we did not want that. And we had built throughout this process a lot of protection in there against that.
When these leaders would come and make this argument to you, was that your best argument against it? Is that this kind of disruption will lead to Donald Trump winning?
Our best argument was that there's only one person who's ever beaten Donald Trump, and he happens to be the Democratic nominee of the Democratic Party who won over 14 million votes in a primary system in which people were allowed to go out and vote, in which somebody challenged him in New Hampshire, a place he wasn't even on the ballot, and spent a huge amount of money up there to make the case that he was too old, and lost overwhelmingly to a write-in campaign for Joe Biden. That this argument had been tested with voters and that voters actually get to make these decisions. So that was part of our argument. But, clearly this fantasy idea that there was going to be, town halls across the country, anyone who knows anything about nominating processes, well, I'll just say, we just had a very compressed 2-week process to choose a vice president. How much oppo got dropped on people during that?
Yeah, a decent amount.
Okay, so tell me this town hall was all going to be.
Saying.
It would have been extraordinarily ugly. People don't emerge from that. But also, Joe Biden had won the nomination. We're a party that likes to talk about voting and voting rights and made a decision. Some leaders did that they wanted to go disenfranchise everyone who'd participate in the primaries. He got 87% of the votes. You all covered there's going to be a huge uncommitted vote in this state or that state. It didn't happen. Okay. People went and they voted for Joe Biden. So we felt that we were in a fairly strong position. The president had won a nomination that voters had actually chosen him.
What do you think turned things?
It's hard to say. Every time it felt as though it was dying down, somebody would come back out and pour a bunch of gasoline on a bunch of dying flames.
Someone important.
Yeah. That was part of it. Obviously, the president was having a great trip. He had in Nevada. He spoke to the NAACP. It was a really fabulous event. He was scheduled to speak to Anita's. And he got sick and he got COVID. So he had to go home, and he was not in a position where he could go fight back. And I think during that period, it became very difficult for him to sustain this. So,
were you saying that or reminding me of it? It seems like that must have been very difficult and lonely for him to have to be isolated at home, sick, with the entire party rebelling against him.
I think it was extremely difficult for him. Yeah.
And that's the period in which the pressure continued and he started to think about leaving the race.
I think he himself has said that, this is a decision he made because beating Donald Trump is the most important thing. It's why he ran in 2019. It's why he was running for re-election. He reached the decision that he did. It was a very tough decision for him to reach because he was actually the duly nominated by voters nominee of the Democratic Party. But I think he felt very comfortable at the end of the day that the vice president was well positioned to win this race.
When did you personally think that you guys weren't going to win this fight?
That weekend when he was at home.
The final weekend.
The final weekend.
Yeah.
I tend to be someone who doesn't like to walk away from political fights, and have and felt that some of the pieces that we had been putting together in terms of some key core constituency groups, core factions of the party.
The CBC was behind him?
Well, the CBC was behind him. Obviously, a lot of progressives were behind him because of his progressive agenda. AOC, yeah. Senator Sanders.
Sanders.
Senator Sanders, I can't say enough good things about him, who has been just a loyal supporter and a good partner, and someone who has always been willing to tell us when he thinks we're making a mistake. But that is what you want in a good partner. So we had a strategy, and we felt that we really could fight this thing through until we couldn't.
What has it done to Joe Biden's relationship with those leaders I talked about?
I'm not going to speak to that. So,
can you tell us about your conversation with him when you got the news?
Well, I think it's been reported publicly that he got on a call with his senior advisors and told us right about the time he was sending it out. But everyone had figured it out by then. So
on Saturday, you'd figured it out?
I would say Saturday night, Sunday morning. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you take it?
It was rough. And no reflection on the vice president because, I think one of the greatest things about Joe Biden's legacy will be that he made sure that there was a pipeline in which Kamala Harris was going to be the natural person everyone turned to if something happened to him. And putting people in the pipeline for these jobs is so critically important. But, it's a very tough thing to have worked so long towards something and have it end. But at the same time, it's not ending because there is going to be a battle for the soul of the nation with a new standard bearer at the top. And we're all going to have to work very hard because it is a tough race.
in his speech, in his Oval Office address, he didn't really explain why. He didn't really say, I'm not going to be the nominee of my party anymore because I don't have the energy to campaign. Because if I'm reelected, I can't serve for 4 more years. I feel fine, but the voters think I'm too old. Therefore, I've got to step aside. Yeah. He made an allusion to party unity, but he never really said why.
I think you're going to have to wait till he writes his book. Right? Maybe he'll come on your podcast.
I know the reasons that, Schumer and Pelosi were saying to him, which were about those things that, how was he going to serve 4 more years, or he couldn't campaign based on the debate performance. It doesn't seem like he ever agreed with those arguments that the party leaders were saying to him.
Well, I would say he was campaigning. He was campaigning in front of large and enthusiastic crowds, talked to anyone who covered his Detroit rally, talked to anyone who covered his North Carolina, his Wisconsin rally, his campaigning in Pennsylvania. So the idea that somehow he couldn't campaign was just ludicrous. He was campaigning in front of very large, very enthusiastic crowds. The second thing, though, is he had been performing the job of president and has transformed this country and has been a great president. And even as recently as last week, when he brought the hostages home from Russia. So the idea that
his approval rating's going up too.
The idea he couldn't be president or couldn't campaign for president are both just ridiculous.
So that's not why.
I read his book when he writes it.
I mean, I interpret the unity thing as that, I had to do this because I think I'm fine. I can run and serve, but they don't think I can. So to preserve party unity, I've got to step aside.
He'll speak to this when he's ready to speak to it.
Let's talk about the aftermath and this decision to endorse Harris and her quick consolidation of the party. I assume there was never any question that once he made this decision that he was going to endorse Harris.
Never a question.
Because previous presidents have not. That's not necessarily been what they. What they do is just automatically anoint the vice president. Sometimes as a primary, and they stay out of it. Barack Obama famously did that. Lots of other examples. No question as far as you know that was going to happen.
No, this was not a traditional. Okay, it's not a traditional kind of time. It's a 100-day sprint. And when he chose then Senator Harris to be his vice presidential nominee in 2020, it was because he believed she was ready to be president, and because he believed politically she was also very strong. Nothing that has happened over the last 3.5 years has changed his view. In fact, it has only solidified that view. He feels that she's ready to be president. And obviously, he felt that she was the strongest person politically to come in, unite the party, and go beat Donald Trump.
I was reminded that Walz was the governor who organized the governor's call and meeting with Biden to talk about Biden staying in the race. I don't know if you were on the call or in the room, but is there anything notable that you remember about Governor Walz at that moment in time? You don't think he was plotting this whole thing?
No, I do not think Governor Walz was plotting this whole thing. In fact, Governor Walz, somebody we think very highly of, was the co-chair of the Rules and Bylaws Committee.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Oh, well, you should have known that, okay? Because he was the co-chair of the Rules and Bylaws Committee because we had asked him to play that role, and we had and obviously was important in the maneuvering or the decisions around pushing back a couple of days, but keeping the virtual vote intact, which was something that was very important to us. So he is seen as someone who was very loyal to us. He put together the governor's meeting, and I think everyone felt that. I was not in the room for it, but I think everyone felt that he ran it very well, and that it was a constructive and productive meeting.
Just on the virtual vote, because we didn't talk about that, there was a view at the time that it really wasn't necessary, and that you all were doing that just to race to the virtual vote to end this conversation, get Biden nominated officially, and then the conversation would be over.
We had set the virtual vote a long time before the debate.
Because of the
And we said
wrinkle
it
in
because
Ohio?
of Ohio.
Yeah.
But we also
But
said it.
But Ohio took care. I thought Ohio changed their law.
Ohio did, but we were concerned because they had taken so very long, unlike in the past, because Ohio, because the Republican Party has become what the Republican Party is now in terms of how they deal with these issues. And we didn't want to put our candidate in a position where we were going to end up being in federal court in the fall, having to sue to try to get on a ballot, especially because there's a critical Senate race in that state. So we felt that we had already started putting the process in place to do the virtual vote, to make sure it was done early. And even after Ohio said, "Oh, don't worry, we're going to take care of it," I think a high degree of skepticism towards Republican voting officials these days is not unwarranted.
Just because I know you, especially you're on your own, but also through Bob's work on so many of the legal issues that come up. Are you worried at all that Nebraska could change its rules, or is that issue basically behind us?
I haven't tracked it that closely in the last month, but it felt as though it was in a pretty good place the last time I checked.
Got it.
So, but I honestly don't know. So,
and sorry, because I interrupted you on the walls and being in the co-chair of rules. What's important about that?
When you're the incumbent, you tend to put people you trust in those jobs. It's very simple.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah. He's a loyal Biden person, is what you were saying.
We regarded him as someone who was loyal, but also had credibility. He was the chairman of the Democratic governors, extremely well liked, extremely respected. So we felt that he was going to be a good person to be the co-chair of that.
Looking forward to the convention. I know a lot of your thinking about the convention was related to when Joe Biden was going to be the nominee. And now it's obviously different. But what are the, in terms of party unity, and usually when people talk about that, they talk about Gaza. But maybe there are other issues. What do you think could disrupt party unity at this point? When you're looking forward to the convention?
I think the party is so happy to be unified.
Yeah.
The party is just, in a great mood. I think that this convention is going to be a very joyous convention. I think that the mood of it is going to be high. I think that the contrast with the Republicans will be strong, but is going to be done with a very future-oriented thing. We haven't talked about this, Ryan, but, this is a change electorate. 75% of the people in this country think the country's on the wrong track. We've all seen this now for 2 years. That is a change electorate looking for change. And what happened over the past 2.5 weeks is that the Democratic Party grabbed the mantle of change, which is very difficult to do when you happen to control the White House and be the incumbent party. But this, our nominee, has grabbed that mantle of change and kind of moving forward in a way that I think that the Republicans were not prepared for at all.
And for sure. That Donald Trump's still talking about Joe Biden.
Right. He's still talking about Joe Biden and probably will be on Election Day. But also just the dynamic. I think that, and if you look at what they're trying to do right now, they're trying to run a very conventional playbook against her in a way that
liberal. That
exactly.
That kind of thing, yeah.
And she's been vice president for 3.5 years. She's a very known quantity. She's known, but not as known as you think she should be. So she has the opportunity to define herself. But what she has that is so critically important is that she's got change. Trump had an advantage to some extent on change against Biden because Biden was the incumbent and he was getting to run as the outsider again. Suddenly, he's kind of the past and part of what people wanted to move past. If you recall, a lot of voters were like, I don't want either one of them. Well, now they actually don't have to make a choice between the either one that they didn't want. They actually have a very different alternative. So the dynamic here, and in particular, her ability to kind of be and speak and feel and look like a significant change from what's come before is, I think, going to, that spirit and that emotion is going to be throughout this convention.
This is where I imagine it's got to be kind of weird for you and difficult because the argument that you just made, which is perfectly reasonable, is the argument that all of these party leaders were making to you guys at the White House, saying, if we just do this switch up, the age issue, the change issue, it will be resolved. We'll have a new race and we'll be back in it. And
that was not the argument they were making. Well, not at all.
They were saying on the other end of this will be a changed race with party unity. That's not what they were saying.
Well, no, but they weren't arguing this is the way you position. But here's what I would say, Ryan, which is,
I mean, it's got to be hard because obviously you're working for Kamala Harris now. You want her to win, but you just went through this whole period where that was where you were absolutely fighting for that not to happen because you were working for Joe Biden. You guys won the primary and you believe that he should remain. So I'm just like, psychologically, that's got to be a really weird for you and difficult to sort of, deal with both of those simultaneously. Like how do you?
It's not as difficult as you would think.
Yeah.
Because first of all, I think the president has set the example for all of us by being in there, the toughest competitor I have ever worked for in my life.
Everyone says he's still very, very angry at Pelosi, at Obama, at Schumer, to a lesser extent.
But what he is he is 1,000% all in for Kamala Harris. And that is absolutely true.
Fair.
And so that is actually the task in front of us is to win this election and to not let Donald Trump become president again, and to win the House of Representatives, which had certain leaders in 2002 done a slightly better job. Maybe we would control today, but we don't. So to win, to make Hakeem Jeffries a historic speaker, and he will be a great speaker, to keep Chuck Schumer, Democratic leader of the Senate, which is going to be a very, very tough job. But that is the job ahead of us. And it's critical because, as the president has said, this country is at an inflection point, and it truly is at an inflection point. And all of us who believe that and who believe Joe Biden when he said that have one job right now, and that is to make sure she wins and that we win the House and we keep the Senate.
Do you think that Biden's personal legacy is still wrapped up in whether Trump wins or loses? In other words, this decision will be seen through the prism of whether Democrats prevail in the fall. If Harris-Walsh wins, then I think Biden's legacy, having helped usher that to fruition, will be historic and celebrated among Democrats. If she loses, there will be, obviously a lot can happen between now and then, and history takes a long time to really be solidified, but there will be a credible argument that you all waited too long to make this decision and that you didn't listen to the voters and this concern about his age, and that helped Donald Trump prevail.
Which voters were we supposed to listen to, Ryan? The ones you get your texts from, or the ones who actually went and voted for Joe Biden? Okay, I'm just, what's this listen to voters stuff? 87% of the voters who participated in the Democratic primaries voted for Joe Biden. Which voters are we supposed to listen to?
Well, the polling consistently through this whole period showed that there were concerns about his age.
The polling in 1992 in May showed that people desperately wanted somebody to replace Bill Clinton as candidate. Okay. There is always a point. There's always a point in every presidential race where voters are like, no, I kind of wish I had someone else. But you know what? They end up voting for the choice that they make, and they end up generally feeling okay about the choice they make. Joe Biden won the primary votes of 87% of the people who participated in this primary process. All these people could have jumped into these primaries. All of these people could have gone to someone and said, why don't you go challenge him? Let's put this to the test. Nobody did that. And nobody did it because they thought he was doing a damn good job as president. They knew he was. No president in recent times has gotten as much done as he has gotten done in 3.5 years, and he's not done yet. So this idea that somehow listening to the voters spoke. They spoke in the way that voters get to speak, by casting ballots.
Fair.
Yeah.
Did he ever consider not running for re-election?
He told us to assume that he was running for re-election until he told us he wasn't. And so we planned accordingly and we ran a campaign.
So there was never like one meeting where it's like, all right, we got to make the decision about the reelection.
There was never a meeting like that.
It was just always assumed.
Mm-hmm.
Anita, thank you very much for doing this. I appreciate it on your first day off to relive some of this history with us. It's a really fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.